I'm delighted to have Dr. Aileen with me today. Dr. Aileen is the director and primary clinician at Mindset Consulting. As a registered clinical psychologist, she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the practice. Dr. Aileen is also an experienced speaker and presenter as well. So some of you have already seen her in our previous webinars. She's passionate about raising awareness for mental health, and she's a coach and mentor for other clinicians and a board-approved supervisor for APS, Australia Psychological Society. Before we get started, we'd love an interactive session at OnMind. So please feel free to use the chat function to share your thoughts and comments. However, for any questions you'd like to ask Dr. Aileen, we have a Q&A session at the end, so please put them into the Q&A function so that they don't get lost. Without further ado, Dr. Aileen, please take the stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Nan, and welcome everyone. Thank you for having me and for joining us today, this beautiful Tuesday morning, on this webinar on how to have difficult conversations. So Are You OK Day is coming up in 2 days' time, and Are You OK, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is a community charity that inspires Australian communities to look after each other, connect, prevent isolation, promote community cohesiveness, and have difficult conversations with others so that we can support each other. So as the title suggests, it's about having these difficult conversations specific with mental health and specific to workplaces. So please participate through the Q&A and through the chat so we can have an interactive session today. So welcome and thanks for joining us. I'd like to start off with talking a little bit about why this is a relevant topic. We all have good days and bad days, and we know that mental health issues affect everyone. The objective of today's talk and what we're going to be learning today is really about understanding why this is such an important topic to be discussing, to know what signs to look out for, to see whether someone is struggling, and to understand the power of active listening, what to do, and tips on how to have these difficult conversations about mental health in the workplace with your colleagues. So let's get started. Today's webinar also aims to encourage us to foster a culture in the workplace where it's okay to not be okay. We know that mental health is integral to any success, and historically, where Stoicism may have been celebrated, it has now been proven to create more problems in the long run. And as such, we now are encouraging of people to talk about their mental well-being and to support each other through having these conversations. A personal anecdote I want to share with you, just to start off with and just to kind of create a more relaxed atmosphere, is that when I started my career 15 years ago as a psychologist, I really struggled to socialize and network, especially when it came to talking about the job that I did. Because even though 15 years ago, it wasn't that long, it was still very different in terms of the landscape at which people talked about their mental health and their well-being, and certainly whether going to a psychologist is something they're open to. So I remember going to these meetings and conversations socially about what I did for work, and often I'd have to either make up that I was someone else and doing like I was a cookie designer, I think was one of the jobs that I said I did. And that was mainly because when I did say I was a psychologist, I kind of got this deadpan stare from people not really knowing how to interact with me and what to say. And this was really confirmed by some people that would say to me, oh, well, I must watch out for what I'm going to say to you next because you could be reading my mind. And it made me laugh because most people think that being a psychologist is the same as being a psychic, which we know it's very different, and I don't read minds. But yet the conceptualization of having someone delve into your mental health and well-being is such a scary thought. These days, I'm a little bit more comfortable speaking about my profession, given that there is a changing landscape for mental health awareness, and there's a lot more self-help that's available, and this has seen the stigma reduced significantly so. So this is a good thing for society and mental health and well-being. And so before we kick off, I'd like to just check in with everyone where the audience is at in regards to mental health awareness in their communities and within themselves. So we're going to kick off with a poll that should come up on your screens and is going to just get a very quick 5 questions on 3 questions. Yes and no answers. Do you know of someone who has suffered or currently struggling with mental health difficulties? Do you know what signs to look out for to see if someone is struggling? And do you feel comfortable talking to someone about their struggles? Again, just a yes or no answer. We'll give everyone just a few seconds to complete that poll, and hopefully it's a poll that we can also publish and let everyone know, because I've got some interesting statistics about this that might be indicative of why today's webinar is important. Okay. So based on that poll, we have got 94%, a staggering 94% of you know of someone who has suffered or is currently struggling with mental health difficulties. That is not a surprising result, given the statistics of prevalence of mental health issues in Australia. And 73% of you answered yes, that you do know what signs to look out for. So that is fantastic to hear, and certainly a lot higher than the statistic that we had in the Australian general population. So this is a very psychologically minded group, and I'm very happy and pleased to hear that. And 64%, so a little bit less than the group that know what signs to look out for, and then therefore how many of you would be comfortable to go and talk to someone about their struggles. So that's 64%. So hopefully by the end of today, you will be able to feel a little bit more comfortable with some tips and tricks on how to be able to have those difficult conversations. Okay. So moving forward, so as we've mentioned before, it's a lot more common than we think, in that 1 in 5 adults will experience mental health conditions in the past year. 45% of Australians will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime, many of whom will be active in the workforce. So anxiety disorders are the most common, affecting 14.5% of Australians, followed by depression, which is roughly about 6.5% in prevalence. A quarter of Australians are feeling persistently lonely, and so that is quite high and up since COVID. And approximately 63% are not confident that they know the signs that someone might be struggling with life. And only 41% hadn't asked someone if they were okay, that they weren't sure of the signs. So the polls that we had launched before is really reflective a little bit. The audience is a little bit better with being able to detect the signs. And so that is really already a good start. So the impact of the unaddressed mental health issues in the workplace creates a flow-on effect from the individual to the team, to the business as a whole, and to society as a whole. It is estimated that mental health conditions cost Australian businesses approximately $12.8 billion a year, and that is due to decreased productivity, increased absenteeism, and increased turnover because of workplace conflicts and low morale and poor workplace cultures. So if there is a need in terms of investment in workplace mental health and well-being, this should be it, and it should be convincing numbers. We know that there is a common fear and misconception that talking about mental health makes someone worse, and we know that that is not true. Most people who are struggling often report feeling relieved and feeling understood when they are asked about how they're doing. And so even though the fear is that we might not be the right person, or it might not be the right time, we know that learning how to have these difficult conversations is so important, and it fosters a lot of connection and growth within the workplace, within individuals, and within teams. So now let's get into it in terms of what are the early warning signs to look out for. I've divided it according to 3 factors: behavioral signs, physical signs, and emotional signs. So these are the early warning signs, and by no means is it the only things. These are just the main examples that would be more common. And of course, you might see only one or a few, and some people might have all of them, which is a little bit easier to spot. But in which case, it's quite good to familiarize yourself in terms of what those behavioral signs are. So here it is. So if someone is struggling, you might find them withdrawing from social interaction. So that might be a once sociable co-worker may start to isolate themselves. They could avoid group activities or even start to pull back from casual conversation. So that might simply look like somebody that used to be active on a Slack chat is now quiet. Somebody that used to participate probably in lunchroom or corridor chit chat has now probably become more withdrawn. And another thing that we could notice in someone who's struggling is a decline in their performance. So this is probably more for the managers and the leaders that monitor performance, key indicators. And someone struggling would definitely show some difficulty in meeting deadlines. They might have lesser quality showing in their work, a lack of attention to detail. They might even make some small errors or mistakes. Another tell of someone struggling is that there is an increase in their absenteeism. So they might have more frequent sick days. They might be a little bit more late than usual, or they might have unexplained absences that may indicate that they're struggling with motivation or energy. And of course, energetically, we might feel that they lack enthusiasm if someone is struggling, and they could show lack of interest or motivation on previously enjoyed activities or projects that they're passionate about, that at the moment they're not actually showing that much interest. So that's a telltale sign as well. Procrastination is one behavioral sign. And again, this is based on the person's baseline. So if someone is a kind of a chronic procrastinator, of course, this is not going to be a measure if that is their baseline. So we're talking about a change in their behavior. So someone that probably was able to perform tasks efficiently previously is now showing signs of procrastination. And a last example of behavioral signs that might be obvious if someone is struggling is that they show uncharacteristic mood swings. So someone could become easily frustrated, irritable, or display maybe a little bit more reactivity and intensely to things that might not be as important. So you might find them being reactive, defensive, and perhaps reacting more than normal. Okay, well, let's move on and to some of the physical signs that someone might be struggling. Changes in appearance, such as a noticeable decline in their personal grooming. So perhaps a change in their clothing style, whether they're opting for more looser or more concealing clothes. Again, this has to come from what they used to be and what they are now. So thinking about that. Fatigue, that there will be signs of looking tired, exhaustion. They might even be verbalizing exhaustion and how poorly they're sleeping, or if they're sleeping too much. And because there is fatigue and exhaustion, they might even doze off during breaks or in meetings. They can also present with frequent complaints of aches and pains. We know that depression and anxiety can manifest in physical symptoms like headaches, muscle aches, digestive issues. They can have more complaints of memory problems and generally struggling with physical pains that, again, is not usual and not normal for this person. Changes in weight or eating habits, because there is a symptom of significant weight loss or gain that can be present when people start to struggle. So just watching out for that. And perhaps if you are aware of the eating habits, that is something also to look out for. Are they skipping lunches, or are they kind of like snacking a lot, overeating? There can be red flags. And finally, a physical sign can be restlessness, fidgeting, pacing. There might be but like being a little bit more overactivated, and where sitting still in meetings might become quite difficult for somebody that has the symptom of restlessness. Okay. And finally, the emotional signs, they're probably less likely to, they're a lot more harder to detect and a lot more subtle, perhaps, unless someone is expressing them, but it definitely will be present in someone struggling. Persistent sadness or hopelessness, where they may express feelings of sadness, feeling worthless, feeling hopeless, and they can say this directly or indirectly. They can show increased anxiety or worry. So signs of anxiety like nervousness, they might excessively worry and be quite negative in their self-talk, might even be quite catastrophic in their thinking. You might hear them really put themselves down, be self-critical, and very pessimistic about the future when talking to them about the future and about things in conversation. So that's something to spot for. And you might find that they are easily overwhelmed, even by simple tasks. So, and especially if these are the tasks that they were able to handle with ease previously, that's a kind of a warning sign. And sometimes some people might just kind of feel flat or blunted. So they might not have these high anxiety reactions or depressed and low feelings, but they could be more lacking in emotional response or be seemingly indifferent to both positive and negative. So that's kind of more of like not really having any reaction and appearing to lose interest in a lot of things. Okay, it's really important to understand that these symptoms don't typically occur outside of major stressors. So thinking about what are the stressors or what is happening in the background with this person, if you are able to see that it can explain some of the feelings they might be having and might add some depth into your understanding on how to help this person or what to speak to this person about. So things like relationship issues, major health issues, having work pressure or constant stress on this person. Perhaps they might be going through financial difficulties. Perhaps there is a loss or they're grieving. And this is a big one, life cycle transitions and major changes. And that could be both positive and negative, but nonetheless, very stressful. So that could be, for example, moving house, having a new baby, going through house renovations, planning a wedding. They might be caring for an elderly parent. So the list is endless. So, you know, feel free to kind of join the chat and suggest any other lifestyle transitions or major changes that people could be going through, and then that can spill over in terms of how they're feeling at work and how they present. Okay. So now this is a slide I wanted to talk about, which is how to set the scene, because we need to keep a few things in mind. That setting the scene is as important as what we're actually going to say. It's an important foundation to any difficult conversation. And making sure that, we're in the right mindset and that we're going in with the right attitude. So I'd like to talk to my clients often about having this win-win mindset, where the goal is for both parties to walk away from the interaction feeling positive about it. So if you have that kind of more as a guide in mind, then that should frame a scaffold of how to approach the situation. I also say that, let people know you are okay talking about mental health. And sometimes the work in that goes way before we actually have the conversation. The last thing you want is you seemingly coming out of the blue to ask a colleague or a coworker that about their mental health, and this is something that you've never ever spoken about before. So to try and let people know you're okay about talking about mental health by modeling some of these things in day to day, to kind of make that conversation flow a little bit more comfortably. And coming from a basis or a place where you have a belief that people want to be heard and that difficult conversations can help strengthen bonds and connections. So perhaps creating a positive belief that it's not really a difficult conversation, maybe even reframe that to say these are meaningful conversations that are necessary, and that people do want to be seen and heard, and what you're doing is actually in service of that. So this allows us to have kind of a much more genuine and sincere openness to the process and a positive attitude towards the process. And of course, I always ask people to make sure that before they actually try and help somebody else and be of support to somebody else, to check in where they are in their own mental health and well-being journey, because we know that we can't pour from an empty cup, and that we need to be in a place where we know that when we offer support, that we are able to take on and create that space for that person and not be distressed also by having that stress added on to us. So timing and setting are very important. So, and now, okay, so we have that mindset ready. And now we talk about some communication skills that probably is less spoken about, and this is about active listening. So before we ask, let's ask and check in with ourselves, are we prepared to listen? And active listening, we know, is a communication skills that involves going beyond hearing the words that someone else is telling us. It requires being mindful and an active participation in the process. So there are three key things to that, and that is to pay attention to the words. What are they saying? That's the most obvious one. But then there's this kind of noticing of nonverbal cues, so watching tone of voice, language. It's a bit of a skill, but we all kind of have relationships, and so some of these things hopefully should be familiar to us, and that the process is an active process rather than a passive process. So be active and attentive in listening, and we can do that using these components that I've summarized on this slide. So number one, pay attention. Try to remove distractions and to focus on the speaker, maintain eye contact, perhaps, have positive body posture by keeping your body language open, lean in, nod to make sure that the person, when speaking to you, gives them the cue that you're understanding them. Reflect and paraphrase where appropriate. So as they're speaking to you, part of active listening is to also try and check in with the person. That functions as two things. It makes the other person feel heard and understood. And also it clarifies and validates them as well. So something simple like, so what I'm hearing is, and try to convert some of what they're saying in your own words to make sure that you've understood them. And goes without saying, but avoid judgments and resist the urge to jump in with advice or solutions immediately. So allowing the person to express their thoughts and their feelings without interruptions. I will give you a little bit of an example of what effect that does to someone and how it can be invalidating if we jump in too quickly with interruptions or if we jump in with solutions. So we try to kind of just give them the space and we actively listen. And where appropriate, ask clarifying questions, be gentle with these questions and make sure they are open-ended, and responding with empathy, which is really about putting yourself in their shoes and not really having to jump in and make it better or solutions or make suggestions, but perhaps just saying, hey, that sounds really tough, or I can see why you're feeling this way, or I'm really sorry to hear that. That really sucks. Okay, so empathy is just being able to put yourself in this person's shoes if they were telling you about some of the difficulties they're going through. Okay, so let's recap. So now, so far, we have observed and identified the signs that someone is struggling. We have set the scene for ourselves and externally to offer support and in order to come from a caring and sincere and empathetic place. We have understood and learned the power of active listening and how to do that. And so now we are getting ready to approach someone to ask about how they are going. And so just to start off, making sure that you don't force this upon anybody and checking in with them that this is a good time to chat. Give the person space and plenty of time. The worst thing you could do is asking someone how they are, and then, you know, you kind of fingers and toes crossed that they will say, I'm fine. And in case they did not, then, you know, you're going to kind of have to rush them because you've got a meeting in 5 minutes. So making sure that you have set the scene and that there is time and space for you to be able to attend to the person. And then opening that with open-ended questions and using I statements. And this is where you can incorporate a little bit of the early warning signs that you've detected and give specific examples. So here's an example of how you can start. I've noticed you've seemed a bit different lately. I'm concerned about you. How are you really doing? You seemed a bit stressed recently. Is there anything you'd like to talk about or anything I can do to support? Okay. So let's put it a little bit, get into it a little bit more. Let's put it all together. Here are some tips on how to ask a colleague if they're okay. So first and foremost, be relaxed, friendly, and concerned in your approach. Come from a place of concern and care. Help them open up by asking questions, open-ended, gentle, appropriate. And where possible, if you can, mention specific things that you have observed that made you concerned for them. And here I already insert, if they don't want to talk, try not to criticize them or push the issue. I will tell you in the next slide what to do if you meet resistance or if they deny that anything is wrong. So we can talk about that in a bit. And when you are in that conversation, tell them that you're concerned about changes in their behavior and that you care about them. Being able to reassure them that this is coming from a place of care. So whether they are saying they're okay or they're not okay, this is always a good position to take. At all costs, if possible, try to avoid a confrontation. The worst thing you could do is to ask for this conversation and for it to be shut down, and the person then kind of goes inwards and never talks about this again. So Making sure as well that you take what they say seriously and that you don't interrupt or rush the conversation. So speaking a little bit about that time factor that you will allocate when you have chosen to speak with someone. And of course, this is an important one. It seems like common sense, but needs to be said. Don't judge their experiences or reactions, but instead acknowledge that things seem tough for them. Often what happens when we ask someone is that they could react in a way that we might not expect. And then we kind of take offense or we get defensive, even though, again, it's about them and making sure that the spotlight stays on them. So just watching out on some of those reactions that are more an us issue rather than a them issue. Okay, and if they need time to think and to respond, try and see if you can sit patiently with silence and try not to kind of fill the silence with unnecessary chit chat or words. Encourage them to explain where you can, clarifying questions, open-ended questions, and show that you've listened by repeating back what you've heard, like what we said with active listening skills in your own words, paraphrase, and ask if you have understood them properly. Not only did this means that you're aligned, but also it kind of helps validate the person to let them know that you have listened. And of course, be mindful that some conversations need to occur in the context of your relationship with them. So there might be colleagues that are a lot more closer socially, so they probably would be able to talk about more personal things. If you're a manager, then perhaps some people take some time to warm up, to go into detail and depth because they need to feel safe first. And so this is not a one and done conversation, but again, this is about opening and softening and planting the seeds that these conversations can continue to occur. And lastly, remember to almost always follow up. Offer a time for a future catch up, or send them a friendly message in the next coming days. It doesn't have to be lengthy. It can just be like, hi, just checking in, following up from our conversation. How are you feeling? Would you like to have another sit down or a catch up or grab a coffee? Just a little bit of a reminder on this before I leave that slide is that an additional note on privacy, that reassuring, and please often think about this as these are private and confidential conversations, that you can reassure them that the conversation is confidential unless there is a risk of harm, and in which case you will need to alert HR, or you will need to encourage them to contact professionals. But we can talk about how you can guide them to that process. But encourage them to only share what they are comfortable with. So if they are in the beginning a bit reluctant to share personal things and you don't have that type of relationship with them, again, leave some space for that to happen, and perhaps a conversation in the future, as a follow-up, rather than trying to get all that detail all in the one sitting. And of course, we want you to, first and foremost, to show that you have heard them and to do validate them first and foremost, rather than saying anything else. So thanking them for trusting you if they do open up. But if a person denies that there is a problem, these are the things that you could do. So respecting their response, but leave the door open for future conversations and just letting them know about that. Reiterate that your concern comes from a place of care and support. And again, hopefully this would have planted the seeds that you are a safe person to have these difficult conversations with in the future. And then if a person becomes defensive, stay calm and acknowledge their emotions. So validate, validate, validate. So whether it's a positive response or negative response, validation is always the core of this type of communication, and suggest revisiting the conversation later on if it's something they don't want to talk about in this moment. Ensure that they know, again, you reiterate that your primary concern is their well-being. Okay, often most people understand what to do by knowing what not to do. And these are some of the things that we tend to be all guilty of doing at one point or another, and not realizing that these ways of communicating can be invalidating. And often it comes from a place of care and wanting to help, but when it's not done at the right time, it can kind of land poorly and invalidate someone's feelings. So for example, the first one I've got on here is minimizing. So when somebody says to you, I feel stressed, and your response is, well, everyone feels stressed. This is not bad. And while you might be coming from a place of trying to let the person know that, you know, they're not alone, or you could be kind of really just saying, I'm wanting to reassure you that, you know, you're going to be okay. Often how that comes across in that very moment is invalidating and minimizing. So trying to avoid that. A second way that people can invalidate without realizing is responding with some form of response that competes. You know, either they share information about themselves or about others that takes the spotlight away from the person. So if a person tells you, oh, I'm feeling a little bit stressed because of this, and someone can respond, well, let me tell you what I've had to deal with. Or when I was going through that, I felt blah, blah, blah. And so again, while the goal of that is to relate or to try and connect with the person, when done very early on and without validating someone first, it kind of looks like you are competing, and it does have the effect, the opposite effect of invalidating. A third invalidating type of communication that we often mistake that we do is that we tend to dismiss someone through telling them how to feel or not to feel a certain way. Again, coming from a place where we're trying to reassure and make someone feel better, when we say, hey, don't feel sad, don't feel worried, don't feel anxious, you know, that comes across as dismissing and discounting and has the opposite effect of helping someone, but it gets people to feel a little bit unheard or unseen. And finally, this is a common one, and again, coming from the right place and perhaps not really all that bad if it's done slightly later in the conversation. When someone tells you how they're doing and what they're struggling with, if you jump in too quickly with solutions and problem solving and trying to fix, such as, hey, have you tried doing this? Or I found that this really helps. You know, again, comes from a place of wanting to help, but in that moment feels invalidating for the person, and just not the right time to be doing that, especially when you're having these difficult conversations. Okay, so there are a few challenges that we might face, and just to be aware of them, and that might be, we talked about the resistance, what to do when somebody either denies or become defensive, to try and come back from a place of empathy and care and giving them the space to meet you where they are at. Another challenge we could face in these types of conversations is we can jump in and feel like we have to do it or help them, or we can kind of break our own boundaries to try and save or be the hero or be their therapist. And so be aware of what boundaries and limits of what we can do to help, and then to ask for help if it's something that's kind of outside of our control. One of the things that I do encourage people or managers to do is to often connect the person with others and encourage them to not just talk about this with you, but to also, you know, just kind of find out who else they have told or who else knows about this, because it's more than likely that this person has a group of friends or loved ones, probably other colleagues that they are a lot closer to, that would be of service to them, compared to you doing it alone. And finally, this is more to do with walking the talk. So modeling help-seeking behaviors and understanding that we would like to be seen as practicing how we preach, and being aware of our own ways at which we are encouraged to seek help or to speak up about mental health in the workplace. So people will be aware of that. Okay. And of course, the point of this is not to be the therapist, it's not to be the hero, it's not to save, but to start these difficult conversations, and that we can then relate them to or link them to either internal or external resources that are available ongoing. And of course, it's our job to, in that conversation, to frame that seeking help is a sign of strength rather than a weakness. And hopefully that there are some internal resources such as HR support, employee assistance programs in your organization. And so being a little bit clear about what those resources are. And of course, the external resources that are available in the community, such as Lifeline, Beyond Blue, are really good resources and services, and encouraging them to seek Medicare supported services or consulting with a health professional. And it's really good to know about these things as well, because you never know when it's actually something that you might need for yourself or for your loved ones. So outside of the workplace, these community resources, primary healthcare providers are still really good to know how to access. And then, so finally, related resources that I have pulled out for those of you who are Unmind clients on the platform. There are specifically ones that relates to this presentation. So there's some shorts around managing stress and burnout, supporting staff during absence, and what happens when staff leaves for mental health reasons. There is short courses relating to the art of listening and supporting others. And there is a course and training called Wellbeing Champions Training, and that's really good as well. And that's not just for mental health advocates or first aid. Anyone could do that. And I encourage you all to utilize these resources that are available. Okay, so key takeaways to wrap up. Mental health and well-being is key to a happy life and work success. And we know that 1 in 5 adults will be affected by this. So it's a lot more common than you think. If it's not happening to someone you know or to yourself, it will only be a matter of time. So you've done yourself service by attending this webinar and knowing more about it. So well done. And in the workplace, it impacts mental health concerns, conditions, impacts our productivity, it impacts our ability to be present at work, it can cause conflicts. And so there is hopefully a motivation to get on top of this and to understand a little bit more about what we can all do to support each other. And today we've learned about warning signs, so behavioral, physical, and emotional changes. And we've learned about the power of active listening and why this is important, and some conversation tips that hopefully will give you a little bit of a start in terms of being a little bit more comfortable and confident on how to approach someone and how to be there for this type of conversation to support someone. And of course, asking the person for a follow-up and making sure that we don't just ask the one question like a one and done, but we do make sure that we have a check-in after the conversation. Okay, so I am going to stop there and invite Nayan to come back onto the floor. And we also have got some polls. So exit polls, so the same questions, but just hopefully checking in on how comfortable you are after listening to today's presentation. So just 2 questions, yes or no answer. After today's webinar, do you know more about warning signs that someone is struggling? And also, are you more likely to approach someone and have a conversation about their mental health based on what you've learned today?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Aileen. It was a fantastic session, and I really appreciate all the practical tips. The one thing that for me, like the key takeaway is the approach of sort of invalidating person. Like I think I certainly do that when I have like conversation with my loved ones or colleagues. So I think I really shouldn't do that. I should avoid that. If anyone who have questions, feel free to leave them on the chat or Q&A function. Any questions to Dr. Aileen?
We have a very quiet group today, Nan.
Maybe I'll master the having difficult conversation. But well, then
let me play one slide from the Are You OK charity. And we have a question. So let's thanks, Cam.
Thanks, Cam. Yep. So yeah, there is a question. If you have a staff member who has disclosed they are struggling, but isn't willing to take action to seek out additional support, how else can you support them?
So as I mentioned before, this is not unusual, that you could be one of the first people that they have spoken to. And so just having that conversation already hopefully plants the seed that there is someone there to listen to them, but also to keep the communication lines open, that they might not want to seek help right now, but it might be something that over time, and hopefully if you could continue to show that speaking to someone would help them over time, that they could come around to that. So my suggestion is to just keep the lines of communication and let the person get to that point in their own time.
Thanks, Dr. Aileen.
Okay.
Any other question? Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks for joining. Also, Helen, yeah, thanks for joining the session. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, so I'll just play this video.
One question, last
Yes.
question.
Sorry.
When you keep listening, but the person is not taking action, what should I do?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think it's about checking that we're not acting in a frustrated manner. Often when people are happy to complain, but not willing to take action, it can be really frustrating for the person supporting and listening. So just making sure that we are not in that frustrated state and we are just open to listen to them and perhaps reflecting. And that's a really good way, the power of active listening, reflecting and paraphrasing, and then just putting back that responsibility onto them. And hopefully one day they will realize that really they need to be the one to take action. So again, active listening skills, reflecting, paraphrasing, and putting it back onto them is really helpful.
The great answer. Thanks, Dr. Aileen. Maybe do we have we have a time. So last question, what if the person whom I'm talking to is quite introverted or introvert?
Okay. So introversion is more to do with how what drains them and what energizes them. So someone who is an introvert might be more shy and a lot more quiet. And so making sure that the environment is right for them when you have that conversation. So just making sure that you're taking them to a setting that is, you know, where they feel comfortable, and again, just meeting them where they're at, and trying to do it their way rather than trying to force it your way. So introversion is just more like what drains them. So just maybe being aware that you have to kind of keep the conversations brief rather than, you know, long, deep, meaningful conversations.
So,
Okay. Did you have any additional responses to the questions, Naya?
yeah, just like, a lots of thank you to you. I think there's another question. So, how do we get someone to open up? Any pro tips?
Pro tips. I think, you know, it's people open up when they feel comfortable. And so often, you know, don't go in for the jugular, like try and make small talk. I know that sounds painful to some, but, you know, we don't expect people to tell us their deepest, darkest secrets if we are not comfortable just sharing a little bit about, you know, how's the weather, or how are you doing, you know, just so master the art of small talk. There is something to be said about you know, the kind of the comfort that we get from warming up.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right. I think that's it. Thanks everyone for asking questions. I guess we have a video to play.
Yeah, I just have a short video because sometimes these conversations about mental health can be heavy. And so I think ending on a good note, ending on a really positive video and a message is a really good way to wrap up. And it's only a minute, so hopefully it's not going to take too much of your time. We've got a little bit more time. So I'll meet you on the other side. Play that now.
Are you okay? Day is one day of the year, but life is every day. So if you spot the signs a friend, family member, colleague, or loved one might be struggling, you can ask, "Are you okay?" any day. Whenever you have the time to give your full attention, Monday through Sunday, January to December, find a place where the other person will feel comfortable to talk. If you're not sure how to start, think about the everyday ways you already check in with the people you care about. We often ask, "Are you okay?" without even realizing. Like when you call a friend to chat, drop in on family, or go for coffee with a colleague. If you're ready to really listen to the answer, you can start with a simple question. How are you? What's been happening? How are you traveling? You'll know the right words. And remember, some life challenges don't go away overnight, which is why you should keep checking in. That way, they'll know you're there for a chat if they need one. Ask, "Are you okay?" any day, because a conversation could change a life.
So while we celebrate Are You Okay Day once a year, life happens every day. So it's about getting familiar with how to keep checking in and knowing what signs to look out for, because we know that a conversation can change a life. So thank you so much for your participation. And I have just put a slide here for where you can all find me, and you can follow me on socials for psychology content and projects that I'm involved in. Thank you so much. And I would just like to close off with you, Nayan.
Thanks again for everyone joining this session today, and huge thanks to Dr. Aileen for running these wonderful practical sessions. So now it's time to wrap here. So hope you all learned something really helpful. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.